Do some quick searches on YouTube or Google, and you know what you're gonna find? Loads of articles and videos explaining how to create character backstories. But do you know what you won't find? Articles and videos discussing how dungeon masters can use those same backstories. You see, it doesn't matter how awesome your players' backstories are. If you, as the DM, don't know how to use them in your games, they are de facto worthless. And of course, it's more than just knowing how, but you have to actually do it too. Because when you do start to use your characters' backstories in your campaigns, you'll find yourself with players who are exponentially more invested in your game, care that much more about what's happening, and ultimately have more fun. And this can be immensely satisfying and fun for the dungeon master as well. That's you. So today we are discussing how you as the game master can use the PC backstories your players will have created. This video will be broken down into 3 parts: incorporating backstories into a larger narrative, creating the campaign from character backstories, and empowering players to use their backstories. Part 1, incorporating backstories into a larger narrative. There are 2 basic ways you can use backstories in your games. The first is to incorporate them into a larger narrative. For instance, you may be running an adventure module such as Into the Fae, or you may have your own homebrew campaign centered around a scenario you personally created. Either way, you might still want to incorporate backstories into the game. The second way is to create the campaign from the character backstories themselves, but we're going to be hitting that in part 2. Now, if you're running a pre-made adventure module, using the methods we're about to discuss may involve making small to medium changes to the module itself. In some cases, they might result in large-scale changes to the module, which may not be desired. However, many times you'll be able to just tweak something slightly to make backstories fit in. You'll just have to evaluate which methods seem best for your game and which ones aren't viable. Of course, if you're creating a homebrew campaign from scratch, you can quite easily incorporate any number of these methods. By the way, you may not know this about me, but I love candles, especially scented candles. During my in-person D&D and Pathfinder 2 games, I always have a scented candle burning. For me, it helps add to the atmosphere of the game, and for the last 9 months or so, I have been exclusively using Firelight Fables candles. These are premium candles with wooden wicks that crackle as they burn, and they come in amazing fantasy-themed fragrances. I've mostly been using Dungeon Delve right here, which is why it's almost gone, and I probably need to get another one. And then I have Dark Forest and Noble Manor as well. But I recently picked up Thieves Guild, Realm of Shadows, Waterdeep Inn, and a few other scents that I'm looking forward to using. Now, if you'd like to grab some cool candles for your own games, check out Firelight Fables candles at the link below. And if you use the promo code TheDMLair, you'll get 10% off. Number 1, use character backstories to create adventure hooks. As a reminder, a good adventure hook has 3 elements. 1, it clearly describes what must be done and what the goal is. 2, it motivates the characters and/or players. And 3, it tells the players how or where to get started. So when you are using a backstory to inform an adventure hook, you'll primarily be looking to use an element from that backstory to help motivate at least one of the characters. For instance, if dwarven marauders massacred Timmy the Cleric's hometown, and the adventure hook involves tracking down a dwarven criminal, chances are Timmy will immediately be interested. If the dwarven criminal is from the same marauding band, even better. Number 2, incorporate backstories when developing encounters. One of my players, Ben, once wrote into his fighter's backstory that he was responsible for the death of his mentor. Now, I wanted to bring some backstory element from the fighter into the game, so I decided that his mentor, after dying, had come back as a revenant and was tracking him down. So, during one game session, as they were traveling from point A to point B, the group came across this mentor revenant and several other cronies that he had recruited to help him get revenge. That resulted in a cool social interaction and then a combat. After the game session, I remember Ben thanking me for adding the backstory element into the game. Now, you don't necessarily have to craft an entire encounter based on a backstory. Instead, you could incorporate characters' fears or long-term goals into pre-made encounters. You could take an encounter encounter that already exists in the module, or an encounter you already created, and you tweak it just a bit to fit an element from a backstory. This allows you to simultaneously follow the campaign scenario while using backstories. Number 3, incorporate conflict elements from backstories. A good backstory usually has the seeds of conflict woven throughout it. Timmy the cleric probably has enemies from his past, or unsolved mysteries, or even friends and family that have fallen. All of these are conflict elements, things that you can tie into your campaign's central tension and conflict. For instance, some of Timmy's childhood rivals may have grown up to become minions of the big bad, or that strange portal Timmy once saw but didn't have the courage to explore could end up being central to the big bad's scheme. When you spot these conflict elements in a backstory, grab them and leverage them in your campaign to create tension and drama. Number 4, use NPCs from character backstories to bring in familiar faces. You could use the tried and true method of having NPCs from backstories be quest givers, or you could create a need for a specific skill set, say advanced religious lore, that only Timmy the Cleric's mentor Alexis can help with. Did I just set off a bunch of people's Alexises? I'm sorry. Alexis, forget about that. Go back to sleep. People are gonna be mad at me now. Dude, I could be really like malicious and say stuff like, you know, Alexis order pizza and get that would be really mean. I won't do that. I'm sorry I said that. Oh, wait a second. Actually, I think I'm good because the virtual system isn't Alexis, it's Alexa, right? So I think I'm okay. I think I'm fine. Clearly I don't use it, whatever it's called. Anyway, you could put those NPCs in danger. The cathedral is under attack by demons, and Alexis and the other priests are in peril. Or you could create an NPC that reminds the character of someone they once knew. Alexis is dead, but this Samantha sure does look like her. Could she be her sister, perhaps? And there are any other number of ways to use NPCs from backstories. You just need to think of and implement them. Number 5, give characters a chance to explore their personal objectives. Many backstories will describe the character as having personal desires and goals. For instance, Timmy the Cleric has been looking for the traveling friar who brought him to the faith for decades. Someday he hopes to dedicate himself more fully to this task. Why couldn't that day be today? In your campaign. Now, this could be something that involves downtime activities in between the standard adventures, or it could be full-blown adventures that the character and the rest of the party, of course, goes on. I mentioned the rest of the party because remember, you're probably running a group game, and having everyone else just watch for an extended period of time won't be super fun for them. Like, probably not. Just remember to create obstacles between the characters and their personal objectives. Creating tension and drama and conflict are the backbone of being a game master. And that doesn't change now. And to make it more natural to justify the entire group needing to go along on the adventure, why couldn't that obstacle be so large that Timmy the Cleric has no hope of overcoming it on his own? No, he'll need his fellow adventurers, of course. Number 6, create entire adventures based on backstory elements. Once, one of my players, Trevor, had a paladin, Dalinor, who was originally a member of a thieves guild, and if I remember correctly, had a romantic interest in someone at the guild that he was forced to leave behind. So, what did I do? I put his would-be girlfriend in danger, naturally, and then Dalinor and the rest of the group had to go up against the Thieves Guild and a band of demons they had allied with. To create an adventure based on a backstory element, all you have to do is find something the character cares about and then create a problem or conflict around it. And then you make it of a large enough scale that it requires the full-length adventure to resolve, and not just a quick encounter or social interaction. By the way, if you're finding this information useful, please give me a thumbs up and share this video with your fellow game masters. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel and you think I don't completely suck, why not subscribe while you're at it? It's just like one little click and it makes me feel a whole lot better. You don't want me to go cry in a corner, do you? Don't be heartless and cruel. I cry in the corner all the time. Number 7, incorporate a secret history into gaps from the backstories. Remember that once a character's backstory passes into your hands as the game master, you can take some liberty with it, as long as you aren't crossing any lines which should be established between you and the player. A secret history is something in the character's backstory that is not in the backstory that you add as the game master. Ideally, you'll do this in a gap in the backstory and in a way that feels natural and potentially explains other backstory elements. Once you've decided what this secret history is, your next step is to make it become alive at the game table. It could be an encounter, an adventure, or any other number of methods we've discussed. And of course, if this secret history is something the characters actually knows about, then you should probably tell them about it too. Maybe during the game session as a surprise, or it could be offline as well. And if they don't know about it, well then, surprise. Number 8, take the characters back to emotionally charged places from their past. The group now needs to travel to the monastery where Timmy the cleric performed his undergraduate work. The only thing is that Timmy carries a bit of emotional baggage, trauma, let's call it trauma, from his time there. The monks were brutal taskmasters, and Timmy nearly flunked out. It's the last place he wants to go to. Or Timmy and company might need to travel to the ruins of Timmy's hometown, only to find that dwarves, of all creatures, horrible, nasty dwarves, have established a colony there. Yeah, because dwarven marauders killed Timmy's... You right? You remember? Number 9, challenge characters' preconceived ideas and biases. Timmy has always hated dwarves, but what happens when a group of dwarves saves the adventurers when they get lost in the Underdark? Will Timmy change his views a bit, or will he assume they have ulterior motives? Number 10, remember to use every character's backstory. This should go without saying, but make sure you're not neglecting certain backstories. Give everyone some time in the limelight, unless you have some players that never created backstories. In that case, it's their own darn fault. Part 2, creating the campaign from character backstories. Instead of working backstories into a campaign, you can base the entire campaign on character backstories. Now, this can be challenging to do and does not work with pre-written campaigns, but it can be incredibly rewarding for players. This method first requires that all players submit backstories, of course, but you also need to ensure that the backstory contains the information you'll need to craft a campaign from them. For the most part, if your players follow the free backstory template available on the dmlair.com, which I also discuss in my recent video on creating character backstories, you should mostly have what you need. However, you may also want to ask them your own custom questions to help guide their backstory creations. You'll want to have your players create their backstories plenty of time in advance of the campaign beginning, because you're gonna need to use the backstories to create the campaign. I mean, that should be obvious, right? Now, a good time to do this is when the current campaign is beginning to wind down. There are only a few more adventures left, and the players know that a new campaign is coming soon. Then, as the game master, you do not want to plan out the core of the campaign until you have your players' backstories in hand. You might plan out some basic elements such as location and some very early adventures, but I recommend avoiding even that. Once you have your players' backstories, you want to farm them for mysteries and conflicts, both ones you asked for, ones the backstory template prompted them for, and ones the players added themselves. Your goal will be to tie together as many of the backstories as possible into one cohesive campaign. You are not just having separate adventures drawn from each character's backstory. No, you want them to all tie together into the main scenario, plot, or big bad of the entire campaign. This method makes the entire campaign incredibly personal and almost guarantees player investment. If you do this, you could possibly have the best campaign you've ever played. Now, the pitfall, the danger to this approach is that you end up with a campaign that relies on all characters surviving to the end, which de facto means you must give them plot armor or risk the campaign falling apart. So you need to craft the campaign in such a way that it doesn't require the characters to survive. The characters that started the campaign may have been the impetus to the plot, but that doesn't mean other characters can't pick up any fallen torches. Part 3. Empowering players to use their backstories. It should not be the sole responsibility of the game master to incorporate character backstories into the game. Players need to pitch pitch in as well. First, players should be familiar with their backstory so that they recognize when backstory elements are being brought into the game, and so that they can roleplay their characters accordingly. After all, that's part of the purpose of a backstory, for it to inform the player's roleplaying of their character. By the way, few things smart more than when a GM painstakingly incorporates a backstory element only to have the player not recognize it. Next, players should actively try to use their backstories during gameplay. For instance, Timmy the Cleric might enter a tavern and ask if there are any dwarves present, because, you know, Timmy doesn't exactly like dwarves. This gives the game master the opportunity to say yes, and thus enable the character to roleplay out the situation, perhaps introducing some good old conflict and perhaps a bar fight. Or a character who grew up in poverty might occasionally haggle with shopkeepers to drive the price down, even though they may now be swimming in gold. Old habits die hard, I suppose. Now, as the game master, you should let your players know that this sort of backstory inclusion is not only okay, but encouraged. It may seem obvious to us that players can and should be doing this, but never assume. It only takes a moment to clarify this point, and it can result in some amazing game moments. Anyway, that's what I think. What do you think about incorporating backstories into campaigns? Did I forget to mention anything? And don't forget to pick up some amazing Firelight Fables fantasy-scented candles at the link below, such as Dungeon Delve, my personal favorite. Now, if you'd like to learn more about how to create a good character backstory, watch this video right here. And until next time, happy game mastering. Dungeon Delve! Yay!